pleasure to welcome our presenter, Famara Damfa. Famara, a native of the Gambia, is a PhD student in Natural Resources Science and Management under the Economics, Policy, Management, and Society track. Previously, from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs from the U of M in 2017, he earned his master's degree in International Development Practice with a minor in Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy, and a certification in Nonprofit NGO Governance and Management. Famara's research interests include climate change adaptation, environmental and natural resources policy, ecosystem service valuation, international development practice, and disaster risk reduction in developing countries. Today in particular, Famara will be sharing his studies on coastal adaptation to climate change, specifically in the Gambia. As global climate change has already had observable effects on the environment and communities across the world, this work is more relevant than ever. Please join me in welcoming Famara Damfa.
Thank you, Michaela, for that wonderful introduction. So thank you very much for joining me today to talk about a component of my research in the Gambia, which I believe would be chapter 2 of my dissertation on the topic assessing the risk of environmental and climate change migration, evidence from Banjul, the Gambia. The outline of my presentation is as follows. I'll give you a contextual background of the study area, provide you with a problem statement and a research question, in addition with my hypothesis when I was approaching this problem. I also provide some theoretical foundation, study methodology I employed in terms of survey, and findings. Conceptual framework is basically connecting my findings to some theoretical explanation of climate change migration. And finally, I'll give you a discussion, provide you some recommendations and conclusion. Now, when we spot the Gambia on the African map, you realize that the Gambia is in West Africa, surrounded by Senegal on all three parts. And the Gambia, on the western part of the country, we have the Atlantic Ocean, which makes the country very much exposed and vulnerable to climate change hazards such as sea level rise and extreme precipitation. If you look at the population of the Gambia today, it's believed to be over 2 million people. Over 50% of the population live on the urban side of the country, which is along the coastline, is approximately less than 25 kilometers from the coastline there. Population density in the Gambia is highest in the Kanifing Municipal Council, which is KMC, and Banjul, which is BJL on this map. If you think about this image and think about its institutional relevance and its political leadership position in this country, I would therefore like to emphasize that Banjul is to the Gambia as Washington, D.C. is to the United States. This is because Banjul is the capital city of the Gambia. It's also the citadel of government. In other words, most of the key government institutions in the country are located in Banjul. It is, besides the cabinet, that is the presidential palace and the cabinet, we also have the National Assembly located in Banjul. This is a recent building believed to be built on a wetland. I believe was against the Ramsar Convention that the Gambia is a signatory to. So that is just to tell you that there is really no space in Banjul. We can only build stuff on a wetland. Besides institutions, I would say Banjul is also a commercial and a trading center. The Gambia's international seaport is connected to Banjul. So Banjul is equally an economic hub for national, regional, and international trade. Banjul also has the Gambia's biggest teaching hospital. It also has our central bank, lots of other institutions. Believed to be around 70% of key government institutions are located in this island. Human settlement, there are people also occupying Banjul. About 35,000 islanders are currently living in Banjul. Unfortunately, people have been migrating. In other words, the population in Banjul has been declining since 1983. Net migration rate from Banjul is believed to be has declined by 113% between 1983 to 2013. In other words, about 31,000 people have left Banjul, compared to less than 6,000 people who came in since between these two periods, 1983 to 2013. Banjul is also a hotspot for tourism and hospitality in Gambia. Hardly a tourist will come to the Gambia without visiting Banjul. And the travel and tourism contributes to about 20% of GDP in the Gambia. So that is very significant in terms of its economic contribution to national development. The problem we have in Banjul, as you can see, it's an island. And a study was commissioned in 1996 that basically concluded that majority or large part of Banjul is about a meter above global mean sea level, meaning that 1 meter rise in global mean sea level, Banjul is going to be underwater, right? And Banjul has already experienced rapid coastal erosion since the 1990s and stuff like that. So the other major problem in this city is because, as you can see, a lot of impervious surface. In other words, when extreme precipitation, severe precipitation events occur, water doesn't have its way out. Percolation and filtration capacity is quite low, and as a result, water stays on the streets or sometimes gets into people's houses. So that is very serious. So thinking about all of this background or all of these challenges and opportunities that Banjul offers to the Gambia, I thought about these as one of my research questions. What are some of the factors that are influencing households' decision to migrate out of Banjul since the 80s and the 90s, in terms of looking at it from push and pull factors of migration? And I also want to assess or investigate how current islanders will respond in terms of their willingness to migrate from Banjul with two different scenarios. One is with a government project that will facilitate their migration or their relocation. The other is without such a project. So I hypothesized that environmental factors really have no effect, as my null hypothesis, on migration decision. And the second was that I expect a positive willingness to migrate based on past historical migration record from the Gambia Bureau of Statistics. So a little bit of literature on migration theories just to help us to understand the reason why people migrate. It is believed that Ravenstein has been one of the earliest scholars who really studied migration, a German, and he identified what he calls laws of migration. He said, for migration to occur, number one, there must be a reason. So people have a motive to migrate. Number two, distance is a key determinant of migration. And number three, migrants' characteristics. So those are very important characteristics to think about when you're thinking about migration as a whole. Some of the highlights in his theory included, he said at the time, that the main cause of migration is economic. It is believed to be the case in some regions. Remember, regions differ. And then the other highlight was that migrants mainly move to shorter distances. People like to move to closer, shorter distances from their homeland. And then he also said that migration occurs in steps. So people move from one step to the other before they get to the final destination that they desire to be. And migration also increases alongside with economic development. So these are some of the things you want to think about while we discuss this issue. Another theory is sort of Lee's theory of push and pull factors of migration. Here you can think about push factors as factors that really force people to leave their destination, their hometown. These are real life experiences that people are going through and they desire to only leave. Wherever they are going, they hope that there are some attractive elements or attractive factors that is referred to as push or pull factors in the destination. So pull is more of a perceived condition that they think that they could exploit or utilize. Intervening obstacles to these factors include distance. Again, distance is a main part in migration. Resources, because migration is costly. Migration or immigration laws also play a huge part. Another theory is the neoclassical economics theory at the micro level. Here the idea is that both households and individuals' interest in migration is to maximize their maximize utility based on a net present value. If that present value is positive, people will think that it is really good to go out. But if it is negative, they might prefer to stay. The macro level or the macro model of the neoclassical theory argues that, especially when you think about it in international migration, is the fact that a low-wage region, for example, the Gambia, has lots of labor. You can call it excess labor or surplus labor that can be utilized in a high-wage region, for example, the UK. So you see this international movement of people from low-wage region to high-wage region. In return, there is capital inflow to the low-wage region through remittances, and that remittance plays a huge role in terms of helping households in internal migration also. The other main theory is the network theory of migration, sort of this idea of chain migration. The migration drives itself. The forced migrants facilitate the migration of their friends, their families. So if my father lives in the United States, it's more likely that I will come and join him here. So those are some ideas that kind of play a part. Take note of this other theory. This theory is basically one component that, or one theoretical foundation that really influenced this research. The idea here is that the new economics theory of migration is that migration is perceived as a risk reduction strategy to deal with threats. So you don't have to be inundated, you don't have to be already affected to migrate. People can perceive a threat in the future, for example, climate change hazard. It could be sea level rise, could be severe and extreme precipitation events. People can lay down a plan and then migrate in order to mitigate those risk factors. So I was in Gambia thinking, having all of these theoretical outline or background, I designed a survey, household survey, joined by a couple of students from the University of the Gambia. These are undergraduate students. All of these people is not just for one research like this. So we did like 4 different surveys in the Gambia that I'm not presented on. But this particular survey, here are some of the students, about 8 of them who helped me on this specific survey, which is a household survey. We went and approached households in Banjul. Our sample size was 212 households, and we got a response rate of 96%. Some of the descriptive statistics include 58% of our respondents were male, 33% dropped out of school before they completed secondary school, or what we call high school, 31% completed high school, and 63% earned less than $2,500. This is household income. I remember household size in Banjul is just 4 people. The average household size is 4. A lot of households are single-headed households. And the other is 51% of our respondents are above the age of 35. So another component of the survey was to sort of assess the importance of facilities or structures or services that are offered in Banjul to these residents. So how do they perceive the importance of these things? You can see housing the presidential palace, which is our state house, was ranked number 1. So that would be a White House. So people felt that Banjul accommodating the presidential state house is the most important facility or structure in the island. The second was healthcare provision. Remember, our biggest hospital is located there, so that was number 2. Economic factors were sort of 3, business and trade. Remember, it's a regional and international trading center, and seeking employment was rated 6% among all the respondents. Family living in Banjul compared to others was not really high. Only 6% of our respondents felt that their families living in Banjul is the most important thing to them. So that is just give you a signal that really, family in Banjul is not something people want to continue having there. The primary cause of out-migration, there was a question for them to tell us what they thought were the factors responsible for people living in the city or moving out of the city. 41% said that it's because of over-congestion. Remember, population grows, natural rate of growth, right? Or natural increase of population growth occurs, and there is limited housing space, so people felt that there is over-congestion and they decided to move, right? And poor environmental condition was second, flooding third, and lack of economic opportunities. Even though this is one of the most economic centers of the country, about 5% of our respondents felt that they still need more economic opportunities. That's why people are leaving. Banjulians hear about climate change. A lot of them said they usually hear, they sometimes hear, and they always hear about climate change. Only 5% said that they never heard about climate change, right? Whether sea level rise and coastal erosion pose serious threat to Banjul, 65% of our respondents said yes, they strongly agree that sea level rise and coastal erosion will be very threatening to the city. And an additional 25% agree to that statement. So we ask a question around this issue because this is sort of an international interest. This idea of the developed world, cumulative-wise, is believed to be responsible for global climate change. So from a moral point of view, is it the developed world's responsibility to pay for loss and damage? But over half of Banjulians believe that, yes, they knew so much about climate change that they think that the developed world should be responsible for all of this loss and damage payment. This question was not really about environmental. We asked a question about what do you think was the most important or the most serious problem in Banjul that needs to be addressed or fixed. Environmental came number 1, followed by unemployment. So When we dissect into environmental problems, we realize that city flooding was rated high, followed by sanitation and sea level rise issues. If Banjul will remain a vibrant capital city in the next 50 years, you can see that Banjulians still believe that over 55% disagree to that statement, believing that Banjul will not remain a vibrant capital city in the next couple of decades. And whether the Gambia should build a new capital city, you can see they are divided here. Think about the emotional attachment to place, even though some of them want to move, but they still want to call Banjul our capital city. So majority of them, slightly majority said that they disagree to the proposal that we should build a second capital city, but about 47% believe that yes, we should have a new city. And I'm sure if you do this as a national survey, you realize that more people, if not 80% of the people in Gambia will say we need a capital city. So the migration scenario that we told them was knowing the opportunities and the threats that are currently occurring in Banjul. Suppose the government come with a proposal, which is a relocation proposal for all residents in Banjul to be relocated to a region, of their choice, provided that the land is available. Now, government will take care of the expenses, land expenses, and will pay the property value of their current housing structures, just the property value of what they currently have. And they were also told that they should be clear that they may not directly live with their next door neighbor wherever they might be moving, because people will be moving to different places. The question was whether they would migrate with such government intervention, and 64% of our respondents said, yes, if government can do something like that, we will leave this place. And we asked if strong public support will be received based on that proposal. About 70% believe that yes, the public will support such a proposal. So this is the next scenario. Basically, this is voluntary migration without any government intervention. Government doesn't have the resource. This is a developing economy where people move. Again, 55% said, yes, we will move, even government comes to our aid or not. So regardless of government's intervention or not, it's believed that over 50% of Banjulians will likely leave the island in the next couple of decades. So with this data, I did regression analysis. My dependent variable was a dichotomous one, was a willingness to migrate, yes or no, 0 or 1. I used probit and compared the result to logit. And the X variables I included vary from different categories. Socioeconomic indicators, demographic indicators, perception of institutional trust, perception of out-migration drivers, and importance of the city. So the conclusions or the results show that a household is more likely, is 33% more likely to consider migration if it agrees that environmental and climate-related factors are mainly responsible for the high out-migration from Banjul. So if they believe that their neighbors left because of environmental factors, they are 33% more likely to move. If they believe they are 31% more likely to migrate, if they believe that the Gambia deserves to strategically identify and build a new capital city for the benefit of current and future generations. So that makes sense, right? Well, if either ways, we're going to have a new capital city, so I am more likely to move out of this place if they believe that we should have a new capital city. 3, they are 30% more likely to migrate if they disagree that investing money to protect Banjul against sea level rise and its associated impacts is worth today's investment. So if they disagree that investing money to protect Banjul is worth today's investment, they are more likely to migrate, right? That makes sense, right? Because they feel like this is so devastated, so is in such deplorable condition that we don't even have to put resources in protecting it. So, but if they think that we should still protect it, they are less likely to migrate. That's what it means. 4, they are 16% more likely to consider migration if they agree that the government should be responsible for protecting the island. So these are individuals who want to transfer risk to government. And these are also not in a different result, which I have not included here, is this idea that people who believe that the developed world should pay are more likely to migrate. They are the same people who think that if the government should pay, they are more likely because they want to transfer all of this risk to a third party. But if they believe that if it is all stakeholders' responsibility to protect and remain or to protect this city, they are less likely to migrate. Finally, in terms of ethnicity, that was really something surprising, not surprising, but really a breakthrough something, that they are 30% more likely to consider migration if they identify as being a Mandinka ethnic group than the Wolofs. So Mandinkas and the Wolofs are the main ethnic groups in Banjul. They've been living there for decades, but see, Mandinkas wanted to go out. I don't know, there might be some ethnic issues which may not be really observable, but could be there. So some of the insignificant variables that someone will be like, was it surprising? Well, income was not significant, but the results show that middle income households are slightly more likely to consider migration than low income and high income. That is in line with the literature, because what income really means for migration, when you are in low income category, migration is quite expensive, especially relocating a whole household. So they are less likely to move because of liquidity constraint, right? But they are more likely to move if they are in the middle category. High category also, usually high income earners are people who already invested a lot in their place of destiny. So they might think a lot about moving because they've already had so much capital investment in the place. So it's also right? Education was not significant. In my mind, it's not really, doesn't matter, because education, whatever, education. Age was a little surprising, but it was not significant. Gender was not significant. I was not too much surprised about gender, because this is a single, usually, this Banjul has more nuclear household structures. So you want to believe that, the husband and the wife usually have conversation around migration, and there are difference. There is really no difference. That's what this really means. So they all believe that, either they should move or they should not move. Clarifying question. Okay. So let's discuss this. What my time? 10 minutes. Good. So I will do some discussion trying to relate different migration types to what is observed in Banjul. What is observed in Banjul is not forced migration that you might heard about in other areas. This is voluntary migration. Even though environmental factors some of those factors are undesirable. These people are not forced to leave. It's not so diverse. It's not so bad that they're leaving because they are already inundated. If anything, it is a perceived threat that they believe that sea level rise is coming and extreme precipitation events are occurring on an annual basis, so we're going to leave this place. In terms of internal and international migration, over 90% of this migration is internal. Majority of these people are going to, if you look at the map that I show you, the Canifin Municipal Council, that's where they are going, next door neighbor. That brings us to the next point, that is rural to urban or urban to urban. Well, it's not a rural area, it's an urban area, and 98% of the migration occurs within the urban settlement. So they are going to the next location, which, like I said, the Canifin Municipal Council. When you think about it in terms of rural to urban migration, or the reverse of that, only less than 1% of rural migrants go into Banjul. So very few people go to Banjul. Usually those people, because there are senior schools in Banjul, they will move there because they're teachers and stuff like that. But very few people move to Banjul. The reverse, out of the 100% here, only 2% of the people in Banjul return back to rural areas. So there is an argument in the literature that reverse rural-urban migration will occur because the urban dream has not been felt. In other words, people came to the urban areas with the hope of employment and economic opportunities. We know that urban poverty has been increasing, and there are so many problems in the urban. So some people are going back. But the literature supports this idea. Circular migration will be the order of the day. People will not necessarily pack all of their baggage and go and settle in the rural areas, but they will go forth and back. So they will go and come. All of this migration in Banjul mostly is legal, not illegal, and most of it is permanent. We know that from theory, these are the main drivers of migration: economic, environmental, socio-cultural, political. From Banjul, push factors of migration are these. We got flooding due to extreme precipitation or riverine flooding because of sea level rise. We have poor sanitation and hygiene, over congestion, poverty. People move because they want to eliminate poverty, they want to get employment opportunities elsewhere, especially when they are traveling international. Safety and security. Remember, it's a citadel of government. There has been a lot of coup attempts. People have attempted to overthrow the government, so people in Banjul, some people felt that it's not safe for them to be living in such an environment, which is an island, and there are all of these military interventions, if you like, family conflict. This could be because of infiltration of, if you like, Western culture. Traditional African culture used to be extended family structures. Now we are seeing more nuclear family structures coming up because people want to have their own space. They don't just live in a nuclear family setup. And then the pull factors, better environmental factors outside of Banjul influences people's decision. Better public services or facilities, less climate threats, family owns land or social ties, and even economic opportunities outside, especially when it comes to international migration. I will conclude with dig into the literature when it comes to environmental and climate-induced migration. Who are they? These are people who will lose or have lost their homes and possession because of extreme events. They will usually be isolated, or if not already isolated from cultural and family ties. They will be trapped without resources to move, and they will be internally displaced. Majority will be internally displaced. If they cross international borders, they become climate refugees. They become refugees without any legal status. Remember, UN Convention, 1951 Convention for Refugees does not include environmental factors or economic factors to seek asylum. So these people will go without any status and living in a very vulnerable conditions outside. The IPCC recognizes, says the gravest effect of climate change may be those on human migration, as millions will be displaced. A British environmentalist, Norman Myers, says that the estimate for environmental migrants is about 60 million, 2 times more than UN-recognized migrants, which is around 220 million people. The estimates are that by 2050, around 140 to 200 million people will be considered environmental migrants, and 60% of those will come from Sub-Saharan Africa, including the Gambia. Robert McClemon's vulnerability formula solved for migration, in which I would like to emphasize, he says, migration in the context of vulnerability is a function of exposure to a climate hazard, could be sea level rise, sensitivity of the exposed population, how vulnerable the population is, and other adaptation options other than migration. Remember, before households or individuals venture into migration, they utilize all kinds of adaptation mechanisms at their disposal. Since we're doing well on time. So I will quickly connect the dots in terms of how climate change influences migration through sea level rise. Hopefully you can see this, but the point here is that we know that there is a driver called climate change. A driver in this case is any external influence, any external threat that have large-scale influence on a managed system. Sea level climate change leads to rising temperatures leading to global warming, and the ecological response of that is thermal expansion of ozones, a loss of ice masses, a melting of glaciers, and the changes in terrestrial water. And that leads to rise in sea levels. The known effects of rising sea levels could be flood risk, coastal erosion and loss of land, damage to public infrastructures, and all of those, right? The indirect attributes of, say, for example, damage to public infrastructures and loss of private properties could be lack of shelter, safety and security, lack of public access to markets and schools, which really affects the overall functioning of the household. And if that occurs, some households have the option to migrate. So one of the adaptation options could be migration. However, before they think about migration, they will think about modifying their vulnerability and exposure levels, modifying their either through protection. This could be sea walls, revetments, and stuff like that. If the cost of modification is higher than the cost of migration, they will think about what I call anticipated risk through migration. So they know that these threats are not already affecting them, but they perceive them as future threats. They would prefer to leave, and this is what I observe in Banjul. They will leave Banjul because they know that this would be very costly to fix. If the answer to this is a yes, they will modify their structures and they will prefer to stay. And the most vulnerable groups in Banjul is really the residents and non-resident employees who live in Banjul. Flooding is similar, climate change, extreme precipitation. We got flooding, damage to public and private infrastructure, injuries and death, and we have all of those effects. And another example to point here, if there is damage to private properties, people lack shelter, they lack safety, they lack security. And the cost of rehabilitation of the house at a household level could be super expensive. If it is very expensive, people will migrate. Migration is one option, remember, but the other option could be, can they think about modifying their sensitivity, exposure, or vulnerability levels? If the answer to that is a yes, they will not migrate. But if it is a no, even though this may not be too devastating, they can still migrate because they perceive that there is a threat coming. The most vulnerable groups, as far as city flooding is concerned, think about the mentally challenged when the city is flooded. What happened to them? Think about the students and the employees, right? Think about women and skilled workers, welders. These are people who are actually settled on streets, so they will be very much affected. So in conclusion, the key takeaway for me is anchored on the new economics theory of migration. I think households in Banjul are utilizing migration as a risk reduction strategy in dealing with climate change hazards. However, the overall decision will be based on a positive net present value. So if that is a plus, they might go. Cabinets should think about this, in my opinion, in terms of policy formulation and implementation, and I think this research will also inform knowledge in this area. And then my recommendations are that I think the Gambia should venture into what I call national consultation to start engaging stakeholders in identifying a strategic location and mobilizing resources to build the next capital city of the country. Unfortunately, we just have a new climate change policy, and migration as an adaptation strategy has not been mentioned at all. So I think that climate change policy has to be revised. We need to think about migration as an option. And although we need a second capital city, we still need to invest in hard engineering solutions to protect Banjul, because it's our only capital city. Building a city is super expensive. We cannot just do it overnight. We still need to protect that city. And in conclusion, I believe that Banjulians love Banjul and they would like to stay if they can be assured of any protection. However, the pressures or the threats of climate change will overwhelm us. We as a small country, very poor and, we as a small country, without so much wealth, it will be better for us to think about building a capital city that will be more sustainable, at least for the benefit of current and future generations. That's all I have for you. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you, Tamara. There is time for questions now, if you have any.
So you mentioned the 1951 UN Convention that doesn't include environmental causes in terms of refugees. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, that seems like a big looming issue. It's global. That's not kind of what your research is looking at necessarily, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a very interesting part of this paper that kind of drove me into it, because I think there is politics around this, right? I think that there are still scholars out there who are denying the fact that environmental factors are dominant factors in influencing people's decision to migrate, right? I don't think from evidence or from science we can deny that. We're looking at the relationship here. We're not saying that environmental is the only reason, but for sure it is significant. I think it is political. I think currently, globally, what we see is this anti-immigration rhetorics, right? We see so much xenophobic reaction from even the host countries that these migrants are likely to go, right? The United States is closing their border. If you go to Europe, the Europeans are sending back African immigrants back. So we have all of those political factors. So people are saying, if we legalize this at international level, all of these people in Africa, in Asia will come towards the Western countries saying that we are climate migrants, so please give us sanctuary, give us legal status and stuff like that. So I think that is the threat from the destination point of view, like the countries that they are going to. I think one good argument in my mind in terms of the issue, that is not to say that I don't believe they should be given status. I think they should be given status, especially when their cases are specifically looked into. But what I think also is that the thing that people are trying to be careful about is once we encourage it, we might trigger a global mass movement of people who all claim to be environmental migrants, right? And it may also neglect us from our focus on climate change adaptation. How do these communities adapt in their own locations? Because I believe people love their home. People want to stay if they can. But people will go because they feel like they are not secure or they don't have the opportunities to stay in their own land. That's what I think.
Or perhaps it would force us to think about climate adaptation a little bit more.
Yeah, perhaps, right? Exactly. Thank you.
How do you tease apart environmental
Mhm.
And is that a meaningful distinction when we talk about climate or environmental-induced migration?
That's a very good question. As far as this particular research is concerned, I did not dissect them, right? I consider all of these environmental factors as environmental factors. And I'm not claiming that climate change is, in my write-up, I mostly focus on the term environmental factors, including climate, right? There are other research that will focus more on, look at the climate case scenario that is affecting these communities. In this case, sea level rise is a perceived threat. So it's like it's not actually, it's happening because it's happening in the sense that there is riverine flooding coming to people's houses, there is coastal erosion, the beach area, that sandy, beautiful beach you see, people cannot use it any longer. So it is a threat that is coming, but people perceive this thing. So I think it is distinct from other environmental factors like sanitation issues and all of those. But in aggregation, I would say that they are all environmentally related issues, but they are different. I think that distinction is important to acknowledge.
How well are people informed on the subject itself? I don't know if you found any people that were not aware of climate change or the risk of that.
Information is, as far as the information is concerned, people are very much aware compared to the global average, especially in other countries. You can see that in Banjul, only 5% said they've never heard about climate change. I don't even know who are those people. But the point is that I think people are aware, and this discussion is ongoing in the country. In terms of governments, which is not your question, but governments' approach to dealing with it, I think that needs to be improved. But people are aware. Government is aware. I don't know what, maybe because of resource scarcity problems, like they're thinking more about other problems, they're not focusing attention on this. But at least the people who are there are aware and they want to think about it.
Aren't any more questions? Thank you all for being here, and let's give Mara one more round of applause.
Thank you.